It is 35 degrees on the pavement outside. Inside the largest office and shopping complex in Zimbabwe, nobody has ever switched on an air conditioner. Not a broken one. Not a switched-off one. When this building was designed, the chillers, the ducts, the cooling towers, the entire machine modern architecture assumes you cannot live without were simply left out of the drawings. The architect who left them out had spent a lot of time thinking about termites. This is the story of weather that actually worked, and whether it worked for the reason everyone says it did. Harare sits on a plateau, 1,490 meters above the sea. That altitude does something peculiar to the air. Summer afternoons push into the 30s, and in a bad week, brush 40. But the nights collapse. It can fall to 10 or 14 degrees after dark, every single night, all year round. In 1991, the insurance giant Old Mutual wanted a new commercial building on Robert Mugabe Avenue. 55,000 square meters, offices above, shopping below. The obvious answer was a conventional glass tower with a conventional cooling plant. In Harare, in 1991, that answer was quietly catastrophic. Every chiller, every compressor, every meter of ducting would have to be imported. Zimbabwe had almost no foreign currency to spend on them. Then you have to run the thing. Air conditioning is the single hungriest system in a commercial building, and it wants that power in the afternoon, exactly when a strained national grid has the least to give. So the obvious fix failed twice. Too expensive to buy, too expensive, and too fragile to run, which is how the commission reached Mick Pearce. Pearce was born in Harare in 1938, back when it was called Salisbury. He had trained in London, worked in Zambia, and come home with an unfashionable conviction that a building should be shaped by its climate, not sealed against it. Pearce has said the idea arrived through a nature documentary, a sequence about the great termite mounds of southern Africa. Macrotom's termites are farmers. Deep inside the mound they cultivate a fungus, and that fungus is fussy. It wants to sit at about 30.5 degrees, permanently. Outside the mound, the Zimbabwean day swings from near freezing before dawn to well over 40 by afternoon. Inside, the garden barely moves. The explanation that circulated in the 90s was elegant. The mound is a chimney. Warm air rises up the central shaft, pulls fresh air in through the base, and the whole structure breathes itself cool. Remember that explanation. We are going to come back to it. Pearce, working with the engineers at Arup, took that logic and built it at the scale of a city block. Eastgate Center opened in 1996, two long brick blocks facing each other across a glass-roofed atrium, a canyon, deliberately, so the building shades itself and the atrium acts as a flue. The facades are heavy, deeply recessed, hooded with concrete overhangs. Direct sun almost never reaches the glass. In a building with no cooling plant, sunlight is not light, it is load. But the real machine is underneath. In the basement sit 48 low-powered fans. That is the entire mechanical plant. No refrigerant, no compressors, just fans. They push outside air into the hollow cores of the concrete floor slabs. And those slabs are not flat. Their undersides are cast into rows of jagged concrete teeth. The teeth are the whole trick. They roughly double the surface area of concrete, touching the moving air, turning an inert floor into a heat exchanger you can walk on. Here is the cycle. All night, from around 7 in the evening until 7 in the morning, the fans run hard, about 7 complete air changes an hour. They flush cold, high-veld night air through the building's concrete guts and drag the day's stored heat out. By dawn, the whole structure has been chilled through thousands of tons of concrete, charged like a battery. Then the sun comes up, the offices fill, and the computers and the bodies and the lights start pouring heat into the rooms. The fans throttle back to about 2 air changes an hour, and the cold concrete simply absorbs it. The used, warmed air rises through the building and out of 32 brick chimneys on the roof. Air in at the bottom, heat out at the top. The mound, at 55,000 square meters. The result, interiors that hold roughly between 21 and 25 degrees while it is 35 or more outside. Not thermostat perfect, steady. And the numbers that made the client say yes were financial, not ecological. Leaving the cooling plant out saved roughly $3.5 million in equipment before a single tenant moved in. That saving was spent on the fabric, the mass, the shading, the ventilation shafts. Then it kept paying. Rents at Eastgate came in around 20% below the surrounding towers. because the tenants were not funding a chiller. Nearly 30 years on, it runs on somewhere around a tenth of the energy a comparable conventional building of that size would burn. In a country that has lived through years of load shedding, that is not an environmental gesture. It is the reason the lights stay on, which brings us back to that elegant explanation. Because in the 2 decades after Eastgate opened, biologists went and measured what termite mounds actually do. They are not chimneys. Work by Scott Turner and Rupert Saw, and a 2015 study led by Hunter King and Samuel Ocko, found the air inside does not stream steadily upward at all. It sloshes. Gusts of wind and the daily temperature swing drive air back and forth through the porous outer walls tidal, like breathing. The mound is closer to a lung than a flue, so the famous biomimicry story is strictly wrong. Pearce copied a mechanism the termites do not actually use, and the building works anyway, because what he really borrowed was not the plumbing, it was the principle. Use mass to hold temperature, use the daily swing as your energy source. Stop fighting the climate and start banking it. That is worth being honest about, because it defines where this idea travels. Eastgate depends on cold nights. Harare's altitude hands it a 20-degree daily swing for free. Try the same building in a humid coastal city where the night barely drops below 28 and the concrete never discharges. The battery never empties. It does not work everywhere. It works precisely where the sky gets cold, but that describes an enormous amount of the inhabited world, the highlands, the drylands, the plateaus, much of the interior of every continent. Places now building faster than anywhere on Earth. Pearce proved the model scales. A decade later, in Melbourne, he applied the same logic to Council House 2, a city government office that became Australia's first 6-star green building, and cut its energy use by more than half. Meanwhile, global demand for cooling is on course to roughly triple by 2050. Nearly every strategy on the table involves selling more machines and burning more electricity to run them. Eastgate is the standing counter-argument. 30 years old, still occupied, still cool, still running on a tenth of the power, built for less money than the alternative, in one of the hardest economies in which to build anything at all. The lesson is not that we should all copy insects. It is that the cheapest cooling system is usually the one you design out of the building before you ever have to buy it. I have put the full breakdown in the description, the airflow diagrams, the original Arup performance figures, and the termite research papers that overturned the story. If you want to see exactly how the concrete teeth were sized, start there.